Even after Guild Wars 2 Secrets of the Obscure's new Weapon Master ability, this is still my favorite Elementalist build in Guild Wars 2. Now, I wanted to give the new builds a fair shot, seeing as I haven't had an opportunity to mess around with them since the beta, but after giving it a good college try, I still believe that this is the best build for the Elementalist. And of course, this particular build is going to be centered around condition damage, as I feel that the Elementalist really does thrive as a condition damage. It could also do power, of course. However, I like the aesthetic of applying a lot of burning and bleeding and overloading enemies with conditions. To me, it just feels right. So starting out, one of my favorite builds that I absolutely love, I've loved for a long time, I've made even a video about it, is the Staff Elementalist. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can cut it, but the main way that I have been playing it has either been the core Staff Elementalist or the Staff Catalyst build. Now, they both run very similar traits and skills. However, there are a few changes between the two different builds. So let's take a look at the core build first. So the core build really only differs from the Catalyst build with a couple of skills, namely the Signet of Air versus the Glyph of Lesser Elementals. And of course, the elite skill of Glyph of Elementals versus Elemental Celerity from the Catalyst skill line. And the reason that I would run this build is if I was more interested in having a bunch of elemental pets attacking whilst I'm also attacking. The Elementals can actually put out quite a bit of DPS. Namely, they can put out quite a bit of burning if you choose the Fire Elementals when you are in that attunement. This build is also very good, especially if you are just getting used to the Elementalist, as this will provide quite a bit of tanking options, as most mobs will try to deal with your elementals while you can stay safely at range and blast away. And of course, this build really has a heavy emphasis on just being, well, we'll say, beginner friendly. It's fairly straightforward. So the skills that you go ahead and run are Signet of Restoration, Signet of Fire, Signet of Earth, Glyph of Lesser Elementals, and Glyph of Elementals as your elite skill. For this particular build, we choose basically all the condition damage oriented skills in the Earth, Fire, and Arcane lines. In the Earth line, we run 2, 1, 2. Of course, the Written in Stone trait, which allows our signets to keep their passive effects while their active effects are on cooldown, is a great boon, plus the extra aura generation that is essentially on demand. In the Fire line, we run 1, 1, 1. This is because we want to get as much condition damage, specifically burning, out of our build as possible. Now, you could make the argument of going to Flame Expulsion, which is the second Grandmaster trait, which deals a large burst of damage when you switch out of Fire Attunement. However, I prefer the Fire Field buff, which just passively grants you 10% extra strike damage. And lastly, in the Arcane line, we run 1, 2, 1. These really assist with applying additional conditions, as well as the staff offers quite a bit of crowd control, so you'll be able to get some extra boons via that way. So one little trick that I actually enjoy, especially when playing the Staff Elementalist and specifically the Core Elementalist and using the Arcane line, is using your dodge roll, which now, especially in Fire Attunement, causes a burst of flames to appear every time you complete your dodge roll, and then using your Burning Retreat or Fire Staff 4 skill to stack up more burning as well as more stacks of your Fire Field buff. For this build, as far as gear stats are concerned, we end up running mainly condition damage oriented focus, either between Vipers or Grieving. Now, I do want to shout out Dyrinn, one of the sponsors of my channel, one of the members, a part of the YouTube channel, who mentioned using Grieving in place of Vipers, especially for open world or shorter fight durations. This essentially exchanges out the expertise from Viper's gear set for ferocity. Now, expertise increases the duration of your conditions, whereas ferocity increases the critical strike damage that you deal. So if you're against a boss fight or a open world mob that isn't really going to get all 10 of your ticks of your burning damage, it might be better just to have some ferocity and end the fight quicker. For rune choice, we of course just run Rune of Balthazar just because I'm cheap, and that one is very cheap, but the extra burning is just fantastic. You can stack up lots and lots of burning very, very quickly. For For the relic, we choose Relic of the Fractal. Now, this one gets procced when you stack 6 stacks of bleeding onto a target, and then it immediately follows with applying Burning and Torment to that particular target. Now, in the Earth trait line, your ability Strength of Stone, whenever you immobilize an enemy, it applies bleeding to that particular target. Now, your Signet of Earth immobilizes the target while also applying bleeding. So just using that one skill will guarantee that you'll get your 6 stacks of bleeding immediately. Of course, the Earth abilities, either Eruption or Shockwave, also apply bleeding as well. Shockwave also immobilizes, which will cause more bleeding down the line. Weapon sigils, you can basically run Sigil of Bursting, which increases condition damage, as well as Sigil of Earth, which I believe it's on critical strike. It will apply some stacks of bleeding. Very simple, very straightforward, no real need to change around with that. Given this particular build, with the amount of mobility and the pet distraction, it is a fantastic choice if you were just getting into the Elementalist, and it's one that's available to free-to-play players. Wizard hat not included. So the variation of this build, the one that I play on stream, and I have been when I've been doing my Wizard RP, is swapping out the Arcane line for the Catalyst line. We also swap out Glyph of Lesser Elementals for Signet of Air, and our Elite skill we swap out for Elemental Celerity from the Catalyst skill line. Because the Catalyst is centered around applying a number of different auras and getting our stacks of elemental empowerment, essentially having all of our signets and most of our abilities being either blast finishers or projectile finishers, we can get a number of stacks very, very quickly. For our trait lines, we run 2-1-2. This focuses on granting us some elemental empowerment when we disable or crowd control an enemy, while also stacking increased outgoing damage. Every single time that we get an aura, stacking up to 5 times, which ends up being a total of 15% increased damage just output. It's incredible. And then of course with elemental empowerment and its Grandmaster trait, Empowered Empowerment, you will end up getting 100% bonus stats. Every stack of elemental empowerment grants 1% increased overall stats. At 10 stacks, that is doubled. That is a 20% increase to all stats. It is really, really strong. And what the best part is that between the crowd control and the amount of auras that you have that are either on demand or can occur very quickly, you will get to 10 stacks of elemental empowerment or empowered empowerment very, very quickly. It takes no time whatsoever. Also keep in mind that immobilizing effects will also grant some stacks of elemental empowerment. Now this build tends to be a little bit more difficult as you now need to tank enemies and be mindful of your positioning, and you don't have the distraction. However, you have a ton of extra stats as well as a number of different crowd controls. I bring up the Earth Staff 4 ability, which blocks enemies from crossing over that line, as well as the Lightning Ring, which is Air 5 for the staff, which stuns enemies in any time that they cross. You can also push them away. There's just a lot of different ways that you can control enemies while also just blasting away. The main focus is really just to hit as many different targets with your area of effect abilities. A basic combo when approaching an enemy is to start out in Fire Attunement, hitting them with Fire Staff 3, following up with Fire Staff 2, and then immediately into Signet of Earth. This guarantees that they will take as much of the Lava Font damage, which is through Fire Staff 2, while also bleeding, which will guarantee that you get more burning and more torment almost immediately onto the enemy. And also keep in mind that the Earth ability, Eruption, which is your Earth ability 2 for the staff, as well as Shockwave, are finishers. Earth 2 is a blast finisher, and Earth 5 is a projectile finisher. So making sure that they either cross or explode within a combo field where you have your auras, where you have your combo fields being put down, is going to be pivotal, as that is just essentially free stacks of auras and elemental empowerment. This is another build that I messed around in, and I actually still really enjoy it, and it is nearly identical to the previous build with the staff. However, this focuses on the Catalyst and the Catalyst using the sword. However, I found to have more success specifically using the sword dagger versus the sword warhorn. The dagger just adds a number of different mobilizing effects, while also keeping the same condition damage oriented build and the stacks of auras from signets. It's just a very easy way to get a number of really, really good aura stacks as well as elemental empowerment stacks. And not to mention that the sword offers quite a bit of damage, bleeding, condition, power. I mean, it brings quite a bit to the table. You add that with the mobility of the dagger, especially if you are being up close and personal and in melee, you can't really go wrong. And of course, the offhand earth abilities are both blast finishers. So as long as they are within a combo field, you can essentially get 2 free stacks of elemental empowerment, maintaining that, granting a magnetic aura to reflect back at enemies. I mean, there's just a lot that the dagger and the sword do right together. And again, this build does not necessarily change that much, going between the sword dagger as well as the staff. As far as your signet skills are concerned, essentially all of your traits are the same. Your gear choice is still the same, and it's just a lot of damage, and it's good fun. Who doesn't want to swing a fire sword? And without a doubt, one of the most OG builds, and it's one that I've essentially been doing since the beginning of End of Dragons, which is the double dagger signet condition catalyst. Essentially, everything is the same. This build is just, in my opinion, super strong. It applies a ton of conditions. I have no problem handling any enemies in open world, but the main hand dagger, in comparison to either the sword or the staff, is able to not only provide some pretty good condition damage, either burning or immobilizing and crippling effects, but then also they can generate an aura, specifically a shocking aura, on demand. That's not even to mention the dagger offhand from the water attunement, either in this build or the previous sword build, which was the Conjure Frost aura, which essentially grants you that Frost aura immediately. Now, this build tends to be a little bit more intensive, as the dagger is up close and personal and requires a lot of APM. Essentially, spamming your abilities is one of the better ways to survive. However, making sure that you are keeping up your burning stacks, making sure that you are essentially keeping yourself as healthy as possible, and always be casting. Remember that even if you can't hit an enemy, still attacking is going to proc Signet of Restoration, which is a passive heal over time. So the more that you're attacking, even if you're not dealing any damage, you're still healing, which is always a good thing. And with this double dagger build, essentially everything is still the same. The gear stats are still the same, the rune, the relic, everything stays identical, just carrying it over from one build to the next. And swapping out the weapons in and out changes the playstyle slightly. This is without a doubt my favorite build, is the Signet Condition Catalyst. You can't beat it. What are some of the crazy builds that you've been able to put together thus far in Guild Wars 2? Tell me down in the comment section below. If you want to learn more about the basics of the Elementalist, click this video here. This is going to show you everything that you need to know to get started mastering the elements. Aside from that, stay caffeinated, folks.